Thank you for taking the time to listen and learn from this short presentation. Today I will be talking about social narratives and how they can be useful for your students who have an autism spectrum disorder. Social narratives, simply put, is a short story depicting a social situation. Social narratives describe social situations for learners who have an autism spectrum disorder by providing relevant cues, explanations of the feelings and thoughts of others in the social situation, and descriptions of appropriate behavioral expectations. Typically, social narratives are individualized based upon the needs of the learner. They are generally short stories written from the perspective of the learner. Social narratives are designed to address specific issues that individuals with autism spectrum disorder may need additional support and skill development in. Some examples include social narratives to enhance conversational skills, smooth transitions, decrease problematic behavior, and assist in understanding what others might be thinking. Social narratives help individuals with ASD to understand social situations and what is expected of them. When social narratives are read prior to a social situation, the learner will be more prepared and perform more successfully during that social situation. Learners with an autism spectrum disorder often struggle with social interactions. These learners respond less frequently to social interactions and often engage in shorter interactions with adults and peers. To assist learners in navigating these challenging situations, social narratives use text and images to highlight the important aspects of social situations. Social narratives can be used to assist students in making choices, playing appropriately with materials, playing with peers, increase certain expected behaviors such as raising their hand, increase social interactions, making requests, initiating comments, giving compliments, reducing tantrum behavior or other problematic behavior, increasing their understanding of expected and on-task behaviors, and other appropriate behavioral skills. Social narratives can be used by a variety of people, including teachers, special educators, therapists, paraprofessionals, as well as parents and family members. There are 6 different types of social narratives. They include social stories, social articles, cartooning, comic strip conversations, power cards, and social autopsies. Social stories are the most well-known and frequently used social narratives. They were developed by Carol Gray and describe a social situation and appropriate behavior using sentences that describe and direct the learner. Social stories help the learner understand a particular social situation by explaining the situation, pointing out relevant cues, and showing other people's perspective of the situation. Social articles are similar to social stories. They are tailored more towards adults versus children. Social articles may include stories about going to the grocery store or to the bank. Cartooning and comic strip conversations are simple drawings that visually outline a conversation between 2 or more people. The illustration provides additional support to the individual who is struggling to understand the quick exchange of information that occurs during a social situation. Comic strip conversations help an individual visually work through a challenging situation and can help them identify possible solutions. Comic strip conversations help a learner by emphasizing what the person may be thinking or saying. Power cards are another form of social narratives. They are used to help a learner understand expectations during a particular social situation. Power cards are unique in that they use the learner's special interest to increase social understanding. The special interest itself acts as a reinforcer for the learner as it describes the rules and behavioral expectations for a social situation. Power cards are useful when the learner needs to understand a particular rule or is experiencing problematic behavior. Power cards can also help a learner understand the expectations during a particular social situation. Social autopsies are used after a social error has occurred to help the learner understand the mistakes they made. Of the 6 social narratives we just talked about, 2 of them are supported by evidence and meet the criteria for being an evidence-based practice. Those 2 are the social stories, which were created and trademarked by Carol Gray, and power cards. Studies have shown that when either of those 2 interventions are used to fidelity, they are able to effectively address and improve an individual's social communication, joint attention, behavior, school readiness, play skills, as well as adaptive and academic outcomes. As we discussed, social narratives are useful in helping learners understand and successfully navigate through social situations. Social narratives are personal to the individual, and you are able to write and create social stories that are meaningful and will be helpful for your students. Before writing a social narrative, it is important to identify the specific social situation for which you plan to use the social narrative. To do this, individuals who work with the learner need to consider information such as what behavior or situation are you trying to change, what is the baseline of that current behavior, and what is the goal or outcome that you hope your student will reach. There are many possible topics and situations a social narrative may be used. Some examples include starting a conversation, answering politely, joining a group, asking questions, sharing toys, going on a field trip, eating lunch in the cafeteria, putting materials away, transitioning between classes, preparing for an event, understanding the death of a loved one, asking for help, using gentle hands and feet, following instructions, and having good sportsmanship. As already stated, the two social narratives that are considered to be evidence-based practices are social stories and power cards. Simply put, social stories describe the social situation, describe the viewpoints of other people, and provide strategies for the learner. Power cards present rules and behavioral expectations for the learner, use the learner's special interest as a reinforcer, and considered useful when a problematic behavior needs to be addressed. This is an example of a social story describing the process of going to the bathroom at school. As you can see, there is descriptive and directive language, and it is written in the perspective of the learner. Before writing a social story for a student, it is important to have all the important information about the specific social situation. If you are able to, it is best to have the opportunity to observe the situation yourself. Some social situations, such as a class field trip, will be a new situation for the student and not be able to be observed in advance. A social story would still be beneficial in order to prepare the student for the event and expectations surrounding that event. When writing a social story, you want to consider what is happening in that social situation, who is involved, what is the learner's perspective, as well as the perspective of others, specific ways the learner should respond in the social situation, and other things the learner may not understand about the social situation. Social stories consist of two main types of sentences, descriptive and directive. Descriptive sentences may describe the event or perspective of others. They may include cooperative or affirmative statements. Sentences that direct provide suggestions for behavior or responses to the specific social situation. It is recommended that for every directive sentence in the story, there are 3 to 5 descriptive sentences that go along with it. Other resources have a 2-to-1 ratio for descriptive and directive sentences. Other tips that you should consider when writing social stories include making sure you write them from the learner's perspective and at their comprehension level. If the learner is unable to understand the story, they will not make any progress toward their goals in that social situation. Make sure the stories are short enough to get the point across without losing the individual with too much information. Again, make sure there is a minimum of a 2-to-1 ratio of descriptive to directive sentences. Descriptive sentences can increase to 3 to 5 depending on the learner. Make sure you use pictures as visuals to assist the learner in understanding, and always try to incorporate the learner's interests into the story. Power cards are considered to be a shorter version of a scenario. Power cards have a picture of the learner's special interest along with the rules and expectations that outline how the individual should be acting in a specific situation. Here you can see an example of a power card scenario. This example illustrates a student's special interest of construction workers to offer directives on how he should follow directions like a construction worker. Once a social narrative is written, it will not work unless it is used. Power cards can easily be displayed for the learner to see. You want to make sure with any social narrative that it is able to be accessed and easily read. Consider the following: the size of the font, the number of words on a page. Are there enough visuals, and are the visuals engaging enough that they capture the learner's attention? If needed, are adaptations made so the student is able to easily access the narrative? Most research has shown that the social narratives are most effective when they are read directly before an identified social situation. If that is not always possible, reading a social narrative repeatedly at a more convenient time has proven to be effective as well. You are teaching a skill as you read these narratives to students or have them read them to themselves. It is important to introduce the social narrative to the learner. While reading it, try to minimize distractions. Explicitly point out important information that you want the learner to know and understand. It is important to create opportunities for the learner to practice the behavior in the context of the social situation. If the target behavior would be for a student to ask a peer a question during lunch, the social narrative should be read just before the student goes to lunch. A teacher or paraprofessional can enhance that skill by modeling asking a question and then having the student practice asking a question. After a learner is introduced to a social narrative, it is important to ask the student 3 to 5 comprehension questions about the narrative to determine if the learner understands the concepts. The social narrative will not be effective if the learner does not understand it. If the student does not understand, you have the perfect opportunity to correct their misunderstanding and reteach right in the moment. Again, role-playing the narrative with the student will be beneficial and give the student an opportunity to practice the target behavior with a trusted adult before the actual social situation occurs. As the student encounters the actual social situation, they may need additional prompts or reminders about the social narratives and what they should do. If using a power card, the adult can simply point to the card as a nonverbal reminder of what they have learned. When a student successfully uses the target behavior, it would be good to provide reinforcement to that student as to increase the likelihood that they will continue to use that behavior in the future. Best practice would be to collect data on how often the social narrative is being used, as well as how often the student is having success in the identified social situation. The data will be able to determine if the intervention and use of social narrative is working for that student, or if things need to be modified or changed. Since social narratives are considered to be an evidence-based practice and proven through research to be successful for students when incorporated with fidelity, if a social narrative is not successful, staff could look to see if the target skills or behavior were well defined, if the behavior or skills they're trying to increase is measurable and observable, if the social narrative is being used with fidelity, if the recommended amount of descriptive sentences to directive sentences is being used, if the length and language of the narrative is appropriate for the development language of the learner, if visuals are being used appropriately for the social narrative, if the student understands the social narrative, and it's being read consistently and prior to the social situation. If all those issues have been addressed and the student is not being successful, then it is time to consider a different intervention or approach with that student. We have talked about a lot in this webinar in regards to social narratives. Social narratives are used to help learners with an autism spectrum disorder understand social situations and what is expected of them. For more information, I would encourage you to check out the Affirm Internet modules on the social narratives. This last slide includes research articles and resources to support the information given in this presentation. If you have questions or would like more information, please feel free to contact me, Heather Stolp, Autism Consultant for the Southwest West Central Service Cooperative. Thank you.